Now I would like to proceed to the first keynote speech by Professor Lynn Davies. Following her speech, there will be a brief live Q&A session, so please leave your questions on the chat box on your right side. Professor Lynn Davies is an Emeritus Professor of International Education at the University of Birmingham and co-director of ConnectFutures. She will present on global solidarity against all forms of systematic discrimination, exclusion, and phobia.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you to UNESCO APCEIU for inviting me to give this keynote presentation at this very important and timely conference. It's sad that we can't do this in person, but in some ways we reach perhaps more people to discuss our ideas and to think about these important areas in this difficult times that we're living in. I've been asked to talk about global solidarity against all forms of systematic discrimination, exclusion, and phobia. So first of all, what do we understand by solidarity? What does it mean? Lots of different definitions, which you will know. Agreement, is it unity? Is it interests? Is it the fact that we have common responsibilities? We should support each other, objective standards. All of these things are true. But I want to use a very specific definition for today, and that is the definition of solidarity as a protest with a clear goal. So for me, solidarity is more than just sharing and networking and friendship and joining of hands, important though that is. If you look at all the images for solidarity, you always see pictures of people joining hands across the waves and different people coming together. But solidarity has to be more than that if we're going to achieve anything. It's not just about protesting, but it's about protesting with an aim, having very specific objectives, such as an end to modern slavery or climate change. You've got to have something very specific that you're asking somebody to do. You need to know who you're talking to, and not just vague things about ending corruption or stopping things. The next question in solidarity are, who are the actors? Who are we talking about here? International organizations are obvious ones, aren't they? So UNESCO, UNICEF, OSCE, all of the World Bank, all of these organizations can develop manuals, guidelines, protocols, standards, compacts, and share examples of good practice. They have the resources and the networking to be able to do that. And very important global action there. The problem with it is we don't always know the impact of these. I've been involved in all sorts of manuals and guidelines with organizations on global citizenship or racism or hate speech. We don't know the impact of these. We don't know how people use them, how long they last. We don't always know whether people find them useful. They let us know if they do, but we don't know if they don't. And I think there's the problem of the transferability of best practice. There's always the case studies, but do people really say, oh, that's a good idea, I'll try that? Or do they look at that and think, it works there, but it wouldn't work here? We don't know. So for schools and young people, which is, I think, our concern or my concern today, these outputs like manuals and so on are less easily visible, but they can be more immediate, more full of impact. So teachers and schools and young people can respond to crisis. They can respond to threat in a much more immediate way. It takes international organizations a long time. We have particular challenges now in the epidemic as part of COVID-19. We have an increase in hate speech, phobia, racism, blame. We have an increase in extremist messaging, propaganda, power of influences, and we have the real challenge of non-violent action. I'm aware, as I speak today, of the dreadful events in France with a teacher being beheaded. This is obviously an appalling thing, but it's something, I think, which the infodemic has given license to take yet more action, yet more hate, yet more extreme measures to fulfill one's hateful ideology. And we have to be wary of that, and we have to think yet more clearly about what we can do, if at all, to avoid that in the future. So what do we do about hate speech? At one level, we can keep up the pressure on media companies, Facebook and so on, to take down harmful posts and harmful videos and so on. This is an ongoing thing every day, and new platforms, new ways people and ideologues and extremists find to post their stuff, and it's an ongoing battle. But we can keep up the pressure to make sure that there's vigilance. There's plenty of ways you can alert them to content if you see something which you think is horrendous or hateful or discriminatory. You can tell these companies to take it down. One of the important things is, of course, teachers' understanding of hate speech and hate crime. What is it legally? And awareness of the issues of freedom of speech and rights to a voice, and trying to do that balance between the rights to free speech and this not going into hate speech. We've got an issue very much at the moment of what's called the snowflake generation. Should we protect young people against offence, against something which they may find slightly worrying? There's a big debate about that, which I haven't got time to go into. But my view, I think, is that we should allow, as far as possible, lots of speech so that we can challenge it. There's no right not to be offended. Religions don't have rights, people have rights. And so we need to make sure that things are out in the open so that they can be challenged, and not just protect everybody from everything. We need to know now how extremist groups are building on COVID and on protests such as Black Lives Matter. So as extremist groups are blaming everybody, saying it's one religion or another, or one ethnicity or another, and far right, far left groups are joining in protests and turning Black Lives Matter protests into violent confrontations, and trying to say it's all about nationalism, or it's all about whiteness or blackness or ethnicity. So we need to know how that's happening and the mechanisms that they use. So the sort of work we do in our organisation in ConnectFutures is that we try to make sure that young people understand the recruitment techniques that extremist groups use, whether Islamist or far right, far left groups. We make sure that they understand the ways that this is done, and it's increasingly sophisticated now. Gone are the days of a simple leaflet, but the sophisticated ways on the web, online, offline, that's done. Understanding propaganda, understanding conspiracy theories. And therefore, one of the very important things to keep going always is critical thinking, controversial issues, turbulence in the classroom, so that you try and disrupt straightforward knee-jerk reactions. It's all about this, it's all about that. You're always trying to make sure that young people understand the difference between fake and fact. So these are the sort of images that you want young people to think about. How is it that extremists lure young people and older people into support? And it's often things like duty. It's your duty to go forward and use violence to achieve an end. It's about redemption, that if you've had a bad past, you can redeem that by joining an extremist group. These are all the Islamist ones here. The use of games to make sure it's appealing to young people. You only die once. Far right has its own versions and all sorts of different ways in. And usually these are based on an extreme nationalism. There's a Britain First one. Neo-Nazi, the idea of keeping a country pure and white and exclusionary. So it's a different sort of appeal, but it's the appeal to patriotism. It's the appeal to your sense of nation and nationhood and what you can do. Again, an appeal to duty, but also an appeal to the use of violence to achieve that. So it's making sure that you can understand all the sort of imagery, and young people are and teachers are trying to understand, and it changes every day, of course. Violence is a key thing and a key problem and getting worse. We know that there's a clear relationship between violence and unequal access to education or to outcomes of education. The more unequal education is in different countries, the more likelihood there is of violence because of frustration, grievance, the hopelessness of a future, and therefore the lashing out against society in general or against people that you blame for your own lack of future. That's increasing in COVID, as I said, because people are looking for something to blame. And also it's increasing because in many countries, including ours, people are locked away. They're getting frustrated. There's a rise in domestic abuse, gender-based violence, violence against children. And that we know is increasing, that more children are now reporting being subject to violence in the homes. Schools are losing their protective value. There's an increase in female genital mutilation, FGM, because the girls are no longer going to schools in some countries, and therefore the schools are no longer protecting them, and they're being married off younger and subject to these sorts of things. So the question in a lot of the international fora and organisations is how to steer youth away from political violence. And there are good examples of that. I just mentioned a few here. And I've been interested to look at what education can do. It's often a mixture of things. You can't just say education on its own will help steer people away from political violence. But in Somalia, you have success in combining education with political engagement. If you can get young people engaged in something, community, it doesn't have to be directly against extremism, but they are feeling a sense of civic control. Liberia, simply, again, using conflict resolutions too, but also cash transfers, that you're making sure that people are viable, that they can live. Lebanon's got good examples of active citizenship program, and that's getting young people to engage in collective action to decrease tensions in their own area. I could go on. I'm sorry if I'm offending people by not mentioning all the good practice in their countries, but I just want to give some examples of how you have to combine education with all sorts of other areas of government and organisations to try to provide status and significant sense of a future for young people. You have to start with building confidence. It's not just about giving people money. If you want people to create change, you want young people to do things, you need to make sure that they have the confidence to do that. We do work trying to help young people with debating, argument skills. And the sort of training we did a big thing around the big debate where we trained young people to have a voice and to speak up. In quite a short space of time, in 6 weeks, we were able to mount a TV debate where they had to, in 3 minutes, make an argument for something. Britain is full, animal testing. Don't necessarily have to believe in it, but you're able to say, yeah, I've got some ideas, I can speak those ideas, I know how to do it. And it's a way of building young people's confidence so that if they do come up against injustice, which I shall talk about in a bit, they can have a voice. They know how to articulate what they are. They don't feel that they have got nothing to say. And sometimes with these programs, we start with the young people and initially they say, oh, I couldn't possibly say that. I couldn't talk about that. Ooh, I haven't got any ideas. But after a while, you get them into the habits of saying, yeah, I can say something about this. I can do something. So it's building confidence to speak. So what does nonviolent protest do? And one of the obvious things is challenging the normalization of violence, whether it's in school, the home, the community, and campaigns against domestic abuse and so on. And this is what one might call a political citizenship education, which I don't think we do enough of in schools, which is building those skills. You can't expect those skills just to emerge. You need skills in protest. How do you set goals? How do you do online, offline campaigning? How do you do lobbying? How do you identify who are the decision makers? Who are the people that you're trying to influence? Who do you think will listen to your voice? What are the actions that you can take to get your voice into the public domain? And these are skills, and they have to be learned and they have to be practiced. But these are which I think is an important skill for young people in schools, is this active political citizenship education. Well, what you're working towards is justice. I always like the Oxfam definition of a global citizen as one who is outraged by social injustice. I'm not sure Oxfam is still using that definition, but I still like it. Do we need more rage? Not violent rage, but a global citizen who says, I'm not going to put up with this. This is disgraceful. I think we're seeing that a lot now with Black Lives Matter because of the whole question of racial justice and what this means. And we can see how a global issue can be started in one country and can spread and can lead to protests and can lead to, we hope, some sort of change if it is targeted and we know what we're asking for. It's not enough, I think, with protests just to say we want justice unless you're specifying what that justice is and whether it's about the police or whether it's about new legislation about how things happen. We need what I call justice-sensitive education. We know about conflict-sensitive education, that education understands about the roots of conflict and how education can contribute to that as well as can help solve it. But justice-sensitive education is about enabling young people to understand how past injustices happened, how you can prevent a reoccurrence of injustice. How is it possible that rights were denied? How is it possible that people weren't allowed to do various things or were discriminated against right through to genocides and so on? So if we have a global analysis, and as part of our global solidarity learning, that analysis enables us to think about the roots of conflict, the roots of racism. Where did it start? The roots of colonialism, not blaming colonialism for absolutely everything, as is the trend these days, but to think about where all of our ideas about others, ideas about the responsibility of countries, where did this come from? And where does the grievance come from that fuels extremism? So it's not just about ideology, but it's about those basic grievances. And awareness of hypocrisy as well. Peace education isn't just about some sort of inner peace, which tends to blame the individual for not being peaceful enough. But if necessary, peace education is a critical peace education. So it's a critique of state or government actions, past and present. So you're not saying it's just about the individual, but it's saying, what is our government doing about war, conflict, the arms trade? How are governments and authorities complicit in conflict and complicit in injustice? And unless we understand all of that, it's difficult to get any action going. I'm aware that I'm talking about very sensitive issues when I talk about governments. And this is a difficult one for teachers in many countries, but it's something that I would argue for, and we'll see what the conference thinks. What global solidarity is not? And for me, global solidarity is not about competition. We're starting to see what's been called vaccine nationalism. Countries seeking this world-beating drug, this world-beating strategy to compete, to challenge COVID, rather than working together. And particularly in these times, you need global collaboration, absolutely solid, rather than some sort of idea that we in this country, we can be world-beating. And that's true of a lot of things, not just COVID. And linked to that, or part of that, of course, is the competition for educational achievement. I don't think global solidarity is helped by all the league tables of which country is best in maths and which country is best in science. what we need to be working towards is reducing inequality instead of saying who is top, who is the best. Because what happens is countries, of course, then focus on their elite kids, the kids who are going to be good at producing these top scores, rather than seeking to minimize the educational inequality in one's own country. And as I said earlier, inequality is being exacerbated by COVID, because the differences in who gets education and who doesn't are getting more extreme in all countries, I think. Who gets access to the internet now, who gets access to online learning. When you've got a family of 8 sharing one mobile phone, it's not the same as a prosperous family that has plenty of computer and plenty of internet access. So we're seeing the growth in inequality in education, and we need to be thinking about that in terms of our challenges to COVID, and not always thinking about, are we better than other countries? So finally, global solidarity. It sounds huge, but I'm saying that we can start small. It's not just about these massive international networks. It's about collaboration and not competition. It's about finding some sort of common goal that we can work towards, and finding ways to network towards that. Finding a way to make a change, however small. It may be something small like a random act of kindness a day, maybe a small change around the way that you try to organize events, things in the community, tensions in the community, finding a way to make some sort of change. And my final remembrance is a notice I have on my wall and have had for years, and it says it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask permission. So get on and do something, experiment, try things together to try to create a change that we all want to see in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Davies, for your... Thank you. Thank you, Professor Davies, for your insightful speech. Now, let me invite Professor Davies back for a live Q&A session. Oh, she's already on. So, hello, hi.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you very much. Yes,
thank you for your contribution, and thank you for your time. We've chosen 2 questions regarding the topic you discussed in your keynote speech. So let me just present both questions first, and you can respond after I present both questions. So I think we can have those questions on the screen. Yes. The first question is from Dr. Lester Ruiz from the Philippines and the US, who is currently with the Association of Theological Schools in the US and Canada. Set of questions he sent us are as follows. What do we need to change in our structures, processes, and values, our ways of thinking, being, doing, especially in GCED, in order for us to arrive at a genuinely effective and transformative global solidarity? Another set of questions. What is involved in articulating comprehensive, contextually appropriate strategies of transgression? How do we assist or empower the youth, as Professor Davies asserts, but not just the youth, as I wish to suggest, he say, in disobeying unjust ways of thinking, being, and doing in the service of transformative justice? I was expecting that we would have questions on the screen because questions are quite long. But if you look at your chat room on the right side, we put his questions, not only his questions, but Dr. Ruiz also sent us some comments that contextualize his questions. So because we put a full text from him at the chat room on your right side, the audience can understand the questions in full context. We shared the full text with Professor Davies as soon as we got the question. So let me just read the next question. The next question is from Professor Yunus Adaye from University of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. His question also starts with some comment. It is very difficult to separate cultural context from people and people from their cultural context, including religion. There is no exception, but people at the privileged positions often in the global north tend to see themselves as if nomes without culture. How can this issue be addressed in GCED so that it does not fall into the pitfall of global cultural imperialism and instead stands up for social justice? Actually, I think the part was taken out. Professor Yunus put the question starting quoting Professor Davies mentioning about the rights. Rights belong to, we have rights for people, but not the rights for religion or culture. I think that was his starting point. But because we share the full text of the questions with Professor Davies, so I think we can hear your response to both questions together. So may I invite Professor Davies?
Fine, thank you very much. These are huge questions, and they seem very disparate. But in a brief response, I'll try to actually to put them together. When I made the recording, the backdrop was the beheading of the teacher in France. Today, it's the terrorist killings in Austria. I'm saying an educational response has never been more urgent. Let me start my response. I want to start with an example which I think tries to bring those questions together. UNICEF, a program called Rights Respecting Schools, whereby the ethos of the whole school is based on the rights of the child. Everyone knows the rights, parents, teachers, governors, and tries to enact those. And children learn about upholding the rights of others. One primary school in London mounted a campaign about female genital mutilation, a campaign called My Body, My Rights, and managed to educate families, aunties, grandparents, the whole community about the harm of this practice and how it infringed their rights to freedom from harm and freedom and right to dignity, short, long term. It's a controversial campaign, not least because they had to learn precisely, boys and girls, what FGM was. They had to mount their campaign, take it out. It's very successful. Especially coming from 9, 10-year-olds. What I want to do now is to make 2 points from this example. One that is a protest with a goal, my definition of global citizenship. And second point is that cultures are not immune from challenge. Cultural rights in the official definition is that everybody has the right freely to participate in the cultural life, to enjoy arts, to share in scientific advancement and so on. Fine, no contest. But cultural rights are not the same cultural rights are not about being absolved from challenge. Critiquing a culture is not some form of Western imperialism. If aspects of a culture, if aspects of a religion are harmful and infringe human rights, they should be contested. Cultural rights can't be used as a justification to limit other rights. I repeat, religions and cultures don't have rights in themselves. It's the people within them that have the rights. It's essential to separate the two. A person's got the right to freedom from abuse. Institutions such as religions or governments do not. If you claim they do, it leads to blasphemy laws and the idea of punishment by the crime of offending some supernatural being, or it leads to punishment for critiquing offending a government, as we see in authoritarian despotic states still today. So what does this mean for global education, a set of values which are transformative? It's a big ask. I'm suggesting 3 foundations here: knowledge, skill, and resilience. The knowledge is of rights. What's a right in international law and what's not, and the difference between absolute rights, the right to life, the right to freedom from torture, and limited rights, which might be the right to liberty, the right to privacy. You would want to go into a home if you thought a child was being abused. Rights education is absolute bedrock. It's the one international set of precepts that we have. Always revisable, not perfect, not a blueprint, but the best we have. And this is a way of being international, being global, using something which everyone can understand. Knowledge too of justice and what this means. Justice is not the same as revenge. I'll say that again because it's a crucial point. Justice is not the same as revenge. The pursuit of justice is about fairness, not to avenge some perceived insult. Young people in their schools need to understand the difference. But how do we know when something's unjust? The politics of disruptions isn't anarchy, beheading people in the name of a god, but interrupting what we know to be unjust processes, whether it's discrimination, police brutality, as in George Floyd. We're currently seeing, interestingly, Nigerian youth who are successfully protesting against their special SARS, Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which is corrupt and brutal. Skills, as I said in my talk, are about advocacy, campaigning, lobbying, networking, raising funds. Nowadays, use of social media, creating websites, platforms, hashtags, non-violent action, and sometimes mockery. Let me give you just one more small example of disobeying unjust rules, which I was asked to look at. A school I was researching in Holland tried to ban the wearing of headscarves for the small minority of Muslim girls. The other students were shocked. So the next day, they all turned up wearing headscarves, boys and girls, and wore them all day, with the point that this did not prevent them learning. The school backed down. A protest doesn't have to be huge, but it needs ideas. And then resilience. I think we're going backwards in our claims for respect and offence. All the no platforming, the cancel culture, the outlawing of freedom of speech, the silencing. We do want campaigns against the extremes of hate speech and internet trolling, but we also need campaigns about upholding freedom of speech and knowing the limits of this. I think respecting diversity is one of these meaningless phrases. We can't respect all diversity, do we? Including Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS, white supremacists, child pornographers. All might claim a culture. So a rights-based education gives a framework for what to respect, what not to respect, what to disrespect, what to tolerate, what not to tolerate. I don't tolerate FGM, honour killings, lack of rights for women. Do you? I don't care whose culture it is. But equally, I don't take personal offence if someone disrespects my worldviews. They're entitled. We need to make young people more resilient and protest about the big things. So, in response to the question, I don't think education, global citizen education, can unaided take on the architecture of statist-oriented institutions. I wish it could. But if it's to do anything, it's got to be hard-hitting and not timid. Kids will make mistakes, that's all right. The global citizen education has to give a voice. It has to give a voice and not silence people. We see the power of youth in demonstrations, don't we, in climate change, Black Lives Matter, the environment, as well as in support of those who risk their lives for free speech. I don't think rioting about the lockdowns in COVID is the way forward, but as have the kids in UNICEF schools, you can campaign about global issues, unjust policies such as the treatment of refugees or returnees, family reunions, very globalized field. So young people can and should draw attention to injustice and state-sanctioned violence. US, that might mean demonstrations about gun laws. One young protester in the US said today he thought that the George Floyd events and the protests really changed the world. Maybe. But if nothing else, what it's done is bring people out to vote. Today, it's the start, and today we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Davies. I think, we have a time limit. But thank you very much for taking up these challenging questions. I think probably this still generates more questions than answers because although GCED tries to put up tries to post some normative kind of framework, still we have to recognize unevenness in power, not only at the state level, but also globally. And we also have lingering issues of identities, how we understand identity. So I think we still have this issue of unevenness in power, even to define whose concept and whose ideas will get become kind of normative framework. So this is a still area that we have to struggle with. So thank you for taking up very challenging questions. I'm very sure that it should go on, and it should open up more room for discussion beyond this conference. So thank you, Professor Davies. I think because of time constraints, we have to close our session now. We have to move to the second speech. So thank you, Professor Davies. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Stay
interesting. Well. Good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to the next keynote speech. Professor Che Jae is a distinguished chair professor of Ewha Women's University. We will present his keynote speech under the following title, Towards Sustainability, Implications of Pandemic and How to Create the Future We All Want.
What an incredible experience we're having. Well, virus is not is something we can even see, but they're killing us. Already over 1 million people, and economic disasters we've never experienced before. So today I'm going to talk about what had happened to us and then what should we do. More specifically, I guess I'm going to ask you to embrace ecological turn. Well, I keep saying, what an incredible. Well, people keep saying these days, this is the attack from nature. Until now, the human beings, have destroyed a lot of parts in nature, and nature couldn't take it anymore, so they decided to attack us. Well, that's probably not true, because nature, as we know, has no brain, so they can't even plan on attacking anyone. This is something we have done to ourselves. We created this disaster. Nobody else has done for us. Well, in this century, we, the South Koreans, have experienced 3 major viral epidemics. First, we experienced SARS in 2022, and then we had MERS, and then this time COVID-19. All 3 of them came from bats, we're told. Bats probably feel very funny because every time something happens, we, the humans, always pointing at bats. Are bats just really incredibly dirty or really nasty? They're full of viruses and bacteria, and they're sending them out to everybody they can find. No, it's not that. It's because there are so many different kinds of bats in the world. Within the mammalian species, about the half of all mammalian species in the world are rodents, mouse and rats, what I'm saying. And then about half of the rest, in other words, maybe 20 to 25% of all mammalian species are bats. So probabilistically, in terms of probability, it's very likely that this kind of pandemic or epidemic could begin with either mouse or rats or bats, because there are just so many different kinds of them in the world. Whenever you compare a number of mammalian species in the tropics versus in the temperate regions, if you exclude bats, the number is about the same. But when you put the bats in there, the numbers of mammalian species in the tropics shoot up incredibly. What I'm saying is bats are basically tropical mammals. There are so many bats in the tropical jungles. Now, this time, while we're experiencing this COVID-19 event, I got a lot of questions from people, but the most frequently asked question was, what is the relationship between climate change and pandemic? Are they related? Or did climate change created this pandemic? I wish I have an answer. They are obviously related. Climate change and the loss of biodiversity and environmental destruction, all these contributed to creating this pandemic. But people are asking a direct relationship. So let me say something I found in terms of cause and effect relationship. As I said, most bats live in the tropics, but due to climate change or global warming, to be specific, the temperature in the temperate regions are going up steadily. Now the bats living in the tropics are slowly moving into the temperate regions. The human species, Homo sapiens, live everywhere in the world, right? Every place you can possibly imagine, we're there. But most human beings are living in the temperate regions. So this means is physical distance between the humans and the bats are getting closer because bats are moving into our territories. That doesn't mean that we are modern day human beings. Every day we go to work, we had to go to a bat cave and say hello and then we start the day. No, we don't do that. But what happens is we are still increasing in numbers. Right now the Koreans, our government, South Korean government is very worried because we have very low birth rate in the country. Well, some of the better living countries are worrying about low birth rate, but when you put together all the birth rate in the world, we're still increasing in number very rapidly. So we need more space to live. So we cut down trees and invade territories of wild animals. So they really have to find a place to live. And in the process, humans and wild animals are interacting ever so frequently. What I'm saying is, I guess this kind of epidemics or pandemics will probably happen more frequently than ever before. But some time ago, I kind of described this situation as a blue ocean. People who are in the marketing business probably know what that is. I mean, even some common folks would probably have heard the expression called blue ocean, very attractive new market, right? That's what we call blue ocean. The human species and the animals we grow, cattle or pigs, chicken, or all these animals are blue ocean for the viruses, for zoonotic viruses. You know why? Because Homo sapiens used to be, really nothing compared to other animals in the world until we started doing agriculture. Well, we've been doing agriculture for the last 10,000 years or slightly longer. Before the time of agricultural revolution, we were really nothing. If we put together the weight of all the human beings living back then, and then whatever animals that follow us, and then we compare our weight to the weight of entire animal world, we consist of maybe less than 1%. I'm saying below 1%. But within 10,000 years, we have grown incredibly. So right now in 2020, if we do that calculation again, we put together 7.8 billion human beings weight, and then all the cattle and pigs and all the animals we grow all together, and then compared to the weight of entire animal kingdom, we consist of at least 96% or up to 99%. It's a complete turnaround. We were below 1%, but now the rest of them are below 1 or maybe at maximum 4%. So if you are a virus living on wild animals and you feel very uncomfortable and you decided to move, let's go to someplace else. So you jump out of the animal you're living on at the moment. Chances are you will be landing on either Homo sapiens or the animals that Homo sapiens grows. So I guess what I'm saying is this is very likely to happen again and again and again. I'm really sorry to inform you that this kind of pandemic is not going to be over. Well, this particular pandemic will go through, but then that's not the end of it. I guess we'll come into this similar kind of phase again and again and again. I'm really sorry to disappoint you while you are having a very terrible time. Now, let me say something brighter. Too many people are saying these days, unless we develop vaccine, we won't be able to get out of this mess. I agree with that, 100%. But I'm not sure whether that's the goal we should have, because it's very difficult to develop a vaccine. Let's go back to the history in this century. We had at least 5 or 6 major viral outbreaks. Now, from SARS, MERS, and then Ebola, Zika, and then that famous AIDS, and then a new flu, and then this time COVID-19. All of this has no vaccine. Do you think we haven't tried? Well, so many pharmaceutical companies have tried, but nobody has succeeded. You know why? A vaccine is so difficult to develop. It takes time. It takes perhaps 2 or 3 years on average. Then once you create a vaccine, you don't just go out and inject to people. You have to make sure that it's safe. Now we're experiencing some of the safety issues of vaccines these days. Well, once you are sure that it's safe to inject to people, you still have to worry about whether it's going to be effective. Now, the flu vaccine we're taking these days, in a good year, the effectiveness is about 50%. What that means is 2 people go and take the shot. One of those 2 people did a useless thing. It didn't work. Now, getting that 50% level of effectiveness, it took 70 years. That flu vaccine was developed in the 1940s. Now we're having about 50% effectiveness. It takes that long a period of time. So if you just wait for vaccine to be developed, perhaps we'll be having this agony for a very long time. So I'm suggesting 2 other vaccines, much more realistic vaccines as far as I can tell. One is behavior vaccine, the other is echo vaccine. Behavior vaccine is something we have done, the South Koreans have done very well this time. We wash our hands, we put our masks, and we keep the distance between us. This is all what we can do behaviorally. We don't have to, we don't have to create a new vaccine. This is something we can do right away with no cost. The virus is not really a living organism. So it doesn't have any brain or anything. So it can't really plan on things. I'm going to attack that guy. So get out of my body and then walk straight up to that person and infect that person. No. As long as we keep maybe about 2-meter distance between us, my virus won't be able to go to you. That's why we decided to keep the distance between us. We call social distancing. So behavior vaccine is a very effective vaccine. Well, it's a cumbersome, it's inconvenient, but it's a good vaccine we can use. I think there is a better vaccine. That's echo vaccine. Well, as I said, in my scenario, if that person, whatever the person who pulled out the scales of pangolins and got infected for the first time, if he didn't do it, 1 million people didn't have to die, right? So as long as we respect nature, as long as we keep the distance from natural world, this kind of thing will never happen. So what I'm saying is, let's protect nature. But that's not something new, right? You've been hearing this for many, many, many years. Well, that Sir David Attenborough, who makes the nature documentary, I mean, on screen, he keeps telling us, we should protect the nature. My hero, Jane Goodall, she goes around the world for more than 300 days in a year and sending out the message that protecting nature is probably a better thing. Nobody listened. Then we got into this mess. So nature protection is essentially equivalent to echo vaccine, I'm saying. But now I want to call this echo vaccine. I want to call it vaccine. Why? The vaccine is something that everybody has to do it together. Within a society, the majority of people has to get it to be effective. Only few people got vaccinated. It didn't work. At least 80% of all the people have to get vaccinated to be effective. So when I change from nature protection to echo vaccine, I'm asking everybody, nearly everybody, to get vaccinated. Now we need to look at the nature from an entirely different angle. Let's respect nature and we live our life. Well, I respect I respect Pope Francisco really greatly because he has done tremendous service to the human being. And one of them, in my opinion, is this. It was last year, in November 2019, Pope announced that he wanted to add one more sin to the humans, the original sin in a way. He said ecological sin must be considered an original sin of human beings. He explained this way. God created everything. So everything is God's creation, right? But then someone who was created by God but believes that he's very strong, so he start beating up other creations, killing others. Do you think God is pleased to see that? God created everything, but among them, they're killing each other. That's not good. So the Pope is saying that kind of thing, the ecological destructor is a sinner. So ecological sin must be added to the original sin. Wow, I was really, really touched. Well, but then, only after 2 months since he announced this incredible new development, COVID-19 began. I think Pope somehow knew what's going to happen. We should listen to the Pope Francisco, I think. Well, let me say something even more terrible than viral pandemic. If I say this, you would feel, I don't know how you feel, but virus will never be able to drive us to extinction because the virus, enough people have died due to viral infection. Then naturally there's a distance among us. The social distancing just happens. So virus cannot infect any more people. So it stops there. If you remember the pest many years ago in Europe, the pest killed only 1/3 of entire European population. Well, 1/3 is an incredible number, but it couldn't kill the rest 2/3 of European population because it couldn't really move to the next person. So, however terrible it is, pandemic wouldn't be able to kill everybody, every one of us. But climate change is different. Climate change could kill every single one of us until everybody disappears. So if you are very scared this time because of pandemic, let's worry about climate change now, because climate change is even scarier, much more scarier than viral infection. Well, let me say something funny. The world billionaires, among the billionaires, some of them, when this pandemic happened, they escaped to the ocean by getting on their yacht. Somebody actually bought No Man's Island and escaped to that island. Well, I thought it was very funny because those billionaires probably thought this would be over within a week or 10 days. So they went out there all by himself or herself. But they never really cleaned up their room, right? They're billionaires. But then they had to do it. And they had to cook. Nothing to eat. So they had to fish and catch a fish and then prepare and all that. They never done that. They're filthy rich. So they, in a few days, they decided, well, cleaners come in, okay? A cook, you come in. Chef, you come in. Well, I need this. Well, please bring us. Well, those people brought the virus, COVID-19 as well. The lesson we had this time is this. Doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter how high class you are, you cannot be free from pandemic until people in the low class, people who don't have much money, are safe from the viral infection. You're not safe either. We learned that we have to go together. Doesn't matter how rich you are, you cannot be safe in this world until other people are all safe as well. We have used this African proverb many times. If you want to go fast, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go together. This is the lesson we really learned very well this time. I keep hearing from various places, people who experienced this pandemic come up with one keyword. Most people came up with that keyword, that is solidarity. We cannot live by ourselves. We cannot go on without helping each other, without doing things together. Solidarity is the lesson we got. And I believe solidarity is a very important character or issue in the activities of UNESCO. And I hope this time we learn the lesson and we change the world. Let me suggest the thing we have to do, the thing we have to embrace is an ecological turn. We, the human beings, have experienced linguistic turn or cultural turn. Now we can talk about informational turn or robotic turns, but those things are meaningless in my opinion. Because of climate change, biodiversity loss, or this kind of viral pandemic, the very existence of a Homo sapiens is being challenged. Other turns are meaningless. We must come up with ecological turn. Let's keep up our very ridiculous scientific name, Homo sapiens. We call ourselves wise human being. I can't agree with you. We're not wise. We're very brilliant, but we're not wise enough. Let's become Homo symbios, the human beings who are willing to live with other animals and plants on this planet. I hope we all change now to survive on this beautiful planet we call the Earth. Thank you.